Rod Rosenstein appointed Bob Mueller and is overseeing the Russia probe. Donald Trump meeting with Rosenstein now on Thursday, the same day as Judge Kavanaugh's hearing. Vanity Fair reporting that's not a coincidence. It's actually that Trump thinks firing Rosenstein would knock Kavanaugh out of the news and maybe even save his whole nomination. Now, if Trump does fire Mueller's boss, what happens? Well, two DOJ officials were telling the Daily Beast they fear that a Rosenstein ouster would reignite Trump's efforts to put an end to the Mueller investigation. Now, that's just a theory. I was just discussing theories with Josh Gerstein, but then you add someone very close who's in the game, Donald Trump's own personal lawyer, today calling for a timeout of the investigation.
I think it's really important that there be a step back taken here and a review. And I think it's a review that has to be thorough and complete, and a review that has to include an investigation of what has transpired with all of these statements and all of these allegations going back to the Strachan page and Bruce Ohr, and basically a timeout on this inquiry.
I'm joined now by Maya Wiley, a former counsel to the mayor of New York City, and the legendary journalist and president of News and Guts, Dan Rather. He's covered his own share of presidential crises over the years, including Watergate. In fact, here he is questioning President Nixon in 1974 about overseeing that investigation into himself.
How can the House meet its constitutional responsibilities while you, the person under investigation, are allowed to limit their access to potential evidence?
Mr. Rather, you have noted today on Facebook, where you do some of your reporting nowadays, that there is much we don't know. And I've emphasized that in our reporting. What do we know about what could be concerning about any effort to use the recent reports to subvert the actual probe?
Well, what this is all about from the President Trump standpoint is stop the Mueller investigation. He's obviously desperately trying to stop the Mueller investigation. But, you know, this has been such a crazy day, Ari. I went through the Watergate period, that's true, but this is even crazier. And I think a lot of people felt, as I did today, that we're sort of traveling through a wormhole of the absurd in real time. History may look back on it in a different way. But, you know, this is about Kavanaugh. The Rosenstein business is a distraction from Kavanaugh. Was it designed to be that? I simply don't know, but I raise a question. It was distraction for a while, but then lo and behold, Kavanaugh appears on Fox News tonight with this interview with his wife, which pulls the focus back to Kavanaugh itself. But with Rosenstein, that case, Kavanaugh, the Mueller investigation itself, what we don't know is so much greater than what we do know, that my respectful counsel to people is take a deep breath, maybe whisper steady to yourself, and see how it all plays out.
You're saying that if we are into meditation, steady is a good mantra to repeat.
Not a bad idea, as a matter of fact.
Before I turn to Maya, let me also ask you, how do you compare these two presidents? We just saw you speaking to Nixon, who was known to operate quite differently behind the scenes than his public persona during Watergate.
Well, it's true. There are all kinds of differences. There are some similarities in the way these two presidents operate, but they're two completely different people in a completely different time. Richard Nixon was, number one, clearly very intelligent, very smart. He was very experienced in foreign policy as well as domestic policy. Been a congressman, a senator, two-term vice president, very experienced. Whereas with President Trump, whatever one thinks about him, you wouldn't say he's very experienced in government. I know his supporters see that as a plus for him, but it's a great difference with Nixon. But two things do strike me. Number one, that both men had a strong streak of paranoia. We all have some paranoia, but both of them have a strong streak of paranoia. And number two, that both of them seem dedicated not just to beating their opponents politically, but destroying their opponents.
I would add that they share an animosity towards those who organize in favor of racial justice in this country. I think that one of the things that's so striking to me about the news of today and the way it comes together is Jay Sekulow, who has been calling for an end to this investigation. In July, he said it must end. In August, he said it must end very soon. So he's obviously, as an attorney for the president, as a personal attorney, taking every opportunity he can to argue for the end of this investigation. it flies directly in the face of their argument about the Kavanaugh Senate confirmation, which is someone who has been accused of sexual assault, who would sit as one of the highest law enforcement officers of the land, essentially, as a Supreme Court justice, should not have a full and thorough and transparent investigation of his actions and an accounting, but somehow on Thursday, on the same day that that confirmation hearing will continue, we will have some private conversation between the president and Rob Rosenstein about what transparency and background he should have investigated.
Right. You said
that's ironic.
The president calling for, quote, transparency, one could argue it's quite transparent what they're doing in setting up a literal split-screen cable moment in a way that they may think redounds to their benefit. As for Mr. Rosenstein, he has previously said he wasn't going to be bullied by much of anything. He was asked about Republican efforts to potentially impeach him, a very high bar over what most people thought were trumped-up document requests. Take a look.
There have been people who have been making threats privately and publicly against me for quite some time, and I think they should understand by now the Department of Justice is not going to be extorted.
That was a political statement about extortion by the House Republicans, but how do you square that with everyone wondering today, was he really considering resigning over a single New York Times report that he'd on the record denied? Because at the end of the day, he denied it. If that's true, and truth matters a lot if you're a prosecutor and you have the power to jail people. If that's true, what he said, then there'd be no reason to reward that by considering resigning.
Yeah, it's very hard to square both the Rod Rosenstein that everyone I know describes as a very thoughtful, person who is not a knee-jerk reaction from this man, who also knows and understands full well, having worked tirelessly, as far as I can tell, to protect the integrity of the Mueller investigation and to protect it from politics, even as a Trump appointee. Let's not forget he was appointed by Donald Trump and confirmed by the Senate, that he would step aside and enable someone who is going to be a much more politicized actor to take his place, who could then say yes or no to anything he so chose to Robert Mueller. Because remember, the seat that Rosenstein sits in is the seat that says, yes, you may indict. Yes, you can seek that warrant for a wiretap.
Yes, you can publish your findings.
Yes, you can publish your findings. So what we have is the idea that Rod Rosenstein would just step back after all of the abuse that he has taken over the past year, now, especially over something that is as contested as that New York Times report, since there were folks who were cited in a separate report who said, I was in the room and actually he was just joking. It's hard to imagine.
Right. And Dan Rather, we don't know how much Cypress Hill you listen to, the rap group, but they used to say, I ain't going out like that. And it's hard to imagine Rod Rosenstein going out like that if, as he said Friday twice, he put out a Friday night late statement, this isn't true. The other thing I'd like your insight on is the way that we've seen people just completely destroyed through relatively brief service in this White House. That does seem different than history, although it's always been a tough town, Washington. Take a listen to not that long ago when Donald Trump was praising Rod Rosenstein as his validator in that famous Lester Holt interview.
He made a recommendation. He's highly respected. Very good guy, very smart guy. The Democrats like him. The Republicans like him.
Is that also something that you see as fundamentally different, how quickly Donald Trump goes from holding people up to trying to destroy them?
Not only fundamentally different than the Nixon administration, but I think fundamentally different from any presidency in the history of the country. You go back and look at the history of the presidencies. There's never been a president where it was so obvious that nearly everybody who gets associated with Donald Trump in one way or the other gets in very big trouble. And, you know, Andrew Jackson had a lot of difficulty. Abraham Lincoln had a lot of difficulty. But nobody, a year and a half into their presidency, had this many people that they, on the one hand, President began praising, and then pretty soon were just thrown aside like the trash.
Right. And that is striking, and you see it really relevant here as so many people are potential witnesses, and they're involved in the investigation of what is a criminal operation in the sense of so many guilty pleas. Whether the crimes go to the top, we don't know yet. Maya Wiley, a regular. Dan Rather, a first-timer. I hope you'll come back.
Be happy to. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, as always. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.